The Galactic Council station called Nexus Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in known space. It floated in the empty void between three major star systems, a neutral ground where 1,000 different species came to talk, argue, and sometimes make peace. Today, the station was hosting a summit that could decide the fate of millions of lives. Jack Morrison stood near the entrance of the main diplomatic hall, his hands clasped behind his back. He wore the formal black uniform of the Human Diplomatic Security Corps, and his face showed no emotion at all. To anyone watching, he looked like a statue. But inside his mind, he was watching everything. The hall was filling up with delegates from across the galaxy. There were the tall, thin Torvani with their silver skin. There were the insect-like Kethany clicking their mandibles as they spoke. There were dozens of other species that Jack had studied during his training. He knew their body language, their customs, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Ambassador Kate Sullivan walked up beside him. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too many negotiations go wrong. She had been a diplomat for 30 years, and she trusted Jack more than anyone else on her team. "They are late," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "The Selvari always make others wait. It is how they show power." Kate sighed. "I know. I just hoped they would be different this time." They were not different. 30 minutes after the summit was supposed to begin, the doors at the far end of the hall opened with a loud hiss. The Selvari delegation marched in like they owned the station. They were a reptilian species, standing about 7 feet tall with thick green scales and yellow eyes. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never met anything stronger than themselves. At the front of the group walked Commander Vorath Kell. He was the military leader of the Selvari forces in this sector, and his reputation was well known. He was aggressive, proud, and completely convinced that his species was superior to all others. The metals on his chest caught the light as he walked, and his thin mouth was twisted into something that might have been a smile. Vorath had never met a human before. He had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had heard the stories about the Deathworlders from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. But Vorath believed those stories were lies. Propaganda spread by humans to make themselves seem more dangerous than they really were. How could a species that lived only 80 years be a threat? How could creatures from a single small planet challenge an empire that controlled 200 star systems? It was ridiculous. As the Selvari took their seats, Vorath let his gaze move across the human delegation. His eyes stopped on Jack, and his smile grew wider. "So this is a human soldier," Vorath said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I expected something more impressive." The hall went quiet. Every alien in the room turned to watch. Jack did not move. His face remained calm. Kate stepped forward slightly. "Commander Vorath, we are here to discuss the border disputes. Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand." Vorath laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "The border disputes are simple, Ambassador. Your species has expanded too far. You will pull back your colonies, or we will burn them." "That is not acceptable," Kate said. "Those colonies are home to 3 million human citizens. Then they should not have built their homes so close to Selvari space." Vorath waved his clawed hand dismissively. "But we can discuss the details later. Right now, I am curious about something." He stood up and walked toward Jack, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. The 2 Selvari bodyguards behind him moved as well, their hands resting on the weapons at their belts. Vorath stopped just a few feet from Jack and looked down at him. The Selvari commander was almost a foot taller, and he clearly enjoyed the height advantage. "I have heard stories about humans," Vorath said. "They say you come from a death world. They say your planet is filled with poison and predators and disasters. They say you are the most dangerous species in the galaxy." He paused and leaned closer. I think they are lying. Jack met his gaze without blinking. I would not know about that, Commander. I am just a security officer. Just a security officer? Vorath repeated mockingly. He looked back at his delegation and laughed again. Do you see? This is what humans really are. Soft, quiet, weak. He turned back to Jack. Your species pretends to be dangerous, but I see the truth. You are nothing but prey animals who learn to use tools. Still, Jack did not react. His training had prepared him for this. He had been insulted by experts. A Silvery commander with an ego problem was nothing special. Kate spoke up again. Commander, I must ask you to return to your seat. This behavior is not appropriate for a diplomatic summit. Vorath ignored her. His yellow eyes were still fixed on Jack. Tomorrow, I will inspect your security detail. It is my right as the senior military officer present. I want to see these Deathworlders up close. He smiled again, showing rows of sharp teeth. I want to see if they bleed like everyone else. He turned and walked back to his seat, his bodyguards following close behind. The summit continued for another 3 hours, but nothing of importance was decided. The Silvery refused to negotiate in good faith, and the other species were too afraid to speak up. When the session finally ended, the delegates filed out in silence. Kate walked beside Jack as they headed back to the human quarters. Her face was tight with frustration. He's going to be a problem, she said. Jack nodded slowly. Yes, he is testing us. He wants to see how we react. And how will we react? Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we will be patient. We will be professional. And if he crosses the line, we will show him exactly what a Deathworlder can do. Kate looked at him. There was something cold in his eyes that she had not seen before. Let us hope it does not come to that, she said. But somewhere deep in her gut, she knew that hope was not going to be enough. The next morning, the diplomatic hall was even more crowded than before. Word had spread about the tension between the Silvari and the humans, and now everyone wanted to watch. Thousands of delegates filled the seats, and millions more watched through the Galactic Broadcast Network. Every major news channel in known space had cameras pointed at the summit. Jack stood in his usual position near the human delegation. He had not slept well the night before. Not because he was worried, but because his instincts told him something was coming. He had felt this way before combat operations. It was like a pressure building in the air, waiting to explode. Kate sat at the main table, reviewing documents on her datapad. She looked calm, but Jack could see the tension in her shoulders. She felt it too. The Silvery delegation arrived on time today. Commander Vorath walked at the front of the group, his yellow eyes scanning the room with open contempt. When he spotted Jack, his thin lips curved into that same mocking smile from yesterday. The morning session began with discussions about trade routes and resource sharing. It was boring work, but necessary. Jack watched the room carefully, noting the positions of every guard, every exit, every potential threat. His training had made this automatic. He did not even have to think about it anymore. 2 hours passed without incident. Then High Counselor Timora called for a brief recess, and the delegates stood to stretch and talk among themselves. This was when Vorath made his move. The Silvari commander walked across the hall with his 2 bodyguards close behind. He moved straight toward the human delegation, and this time his expression was different. There was something darker in his eyes. Something hungry. Kate saw him coming and stood up. Commander Vorath, is there something you need? Vorath ignored her completely. His attention was focused entirely on Jack. I watched the recordings from your war with the Kethany, Vorath said loudly. His voice carried across the silent hall. The cameras turned to capture every moment. I saw how your soldiers fight, running and hiding like frightened animals. using tricks and traps instead of facing your enemies with honor. Jack remained still. The HFY War ended with human victory. Our methods were effective. Effective? Vorath spat the word like it was poison. You call slaughter effective? You burned entire hive cities. You killed billions. He stepped closer, and his bodyguards spread out on either side. And now you come here and pretend to be civilized. You pretend to want peace. He leaned down until his face was inches from Jack's. I know what you really are. You are butchers, monsters. The galaxy would be better off without your kind. The hall was completely silent now. Every eye was on them. Every camera was recording. Kate stepped forward. Commander, this is completely inappropriate. I must insist that you step back. Vorath finally looked at her. Be quiet, female. The males are talking. Kate's face went red with anger. But before she could respond, Vorath turned back to Jack. I am told that on your planet, this is how you greet a worthy opponent. And without any warning, he swung his clawed hand and slapped Jack across the face. The sound echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Jack's head snapped to the side. From the force of the blow, 3 deep scratches appeared on his cheek, and blood began to drip down his jaw. For one long moment, he stood perfectly still. Vorath laughed. You see? Just like I said. Weak. Pathetic. Not even brave enough to defend your own honor. Then Jack moved. What happened next took exactly 5 seconds. But to everyone watching, it seemed to happen both incredibly fast and impossibly slow at the same time. In the first second, Jack's right hand shot out and grabbed the wrist of the bodyguard on his left. He twisted sharply, and the sound of breaking bone cracked through the air. The bodyguard screamed and dropped to his knees. In the second, Jack spun and drove his elbow into the throat of the second bodyguard. The alien's eyes went wide as he choked and stumbled backward. Unable to breathe. In the third second, Jack pulled the ceremonial blade from the first bodyguard's belt. It was a curved weapon with a razor-sharp edge, meant for decoration, but still deadly. In the fourth second, Vorath finally realized what was happening. His yellow eyes went wide with shock and fear. He tried to step back, tried to raise his arms to defend himself, but he was far too slow. In the fifth second, Jack swung the blade in a perfect arc. It passed through Vorath's neck like it was cutting through water, and the Selvari commander's head separated from his body. The head hit the floor first, rolling a few feet before coming to a stop. The body stood upright for a moment longer, blood spraying from the stump of the neck before it collapsed in a heap. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Trillions of beings across the galaxy stared at their screens in disbelief. Jack set the bloody blade down on the floor beside the body. His face was calm, almost peaceful. Blood still dripped from the scratches on his cheek, mixing with the spray of green Selvari blood on his uniform. He looked around the hall at all the frozen, terrified faces. And then he spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. On Earth, we have a saying, do not mistake patience for weakness. Kate Sullivan was the first to recover. She stepped forward, her diplomatic training taking over even as her heart pounded in her chest. Let the record show, she announced in a clear, steady voice, that Commander Vorath of the Selvari Empire committed unprovoked physical assault against a human diplomatic security officer. Under both human military law and Galactic Council precedent, the response was justified self-defense. High Counselor Timora finally found her voice. This is unprecedented. We must call a recess. Security, please. Please secure the area. Guards from a dozen different species rushed into the hall, but none of them dared to approach Jack. They had all just watched what he could do. Jack stood quietly, his hands at his sides, making no aggressive moves. He had done what needed to be done. Now, he would wait for what came next. In the Selvari section of the hall, delegates were screaming in outrage and fear. Some demanded immediate war. Others were already calling for transport ships, desperate to escape the station before the humans decided to kill them and across the galaxy, in homes and ships and military bases on 1,000 different worlds. Beings of every species watched the recording play over and over again. 5 seconds. That was all it had taken. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The diplomatic hall had become a crime scene. Medical teams rushed to help the 2 injured Selvari bodyguards, while security officers formed a wide circle around Vorath's body. Nobody wanted to get too close to the human who had killed him. Jack stood exactly where he had been when the fight ended. He had not moved a single step. His uniform was stained with green blood, and the scratches on his cheek had stopped bleeding. But he remained perfectly calm, waiting. High Counselor Timora sat at the head of the council table, her forearms trembling slightly as she tried to regain control of the situation. She was an old Pethany, a species known for their wisdom and patience. But even she had never seen anything like this. "We must have order," she said, her voice shaking. "We must understand what has happened here." The Selvari delegation was in chaos. Their second-ranking officer, a younger male named Korath, was screaming for human blood. His face had turned a darker shade of green, and his claws were extended like he was ready to attack. "You saw what that monster did," Korath shouted. "He murdered our commander in cold blood. This is an act of war. The Selvari Empire demands justice." Kate Sullivan stood up from her seat. Her face was pale but determined. She had spent 30 years preparing for moments like this, moments when a single wrong word could start a war that killed billions. "I understand your anger," she said carefully, "but the facts of this situation are clear. Commander Vorath struck first. He physically assaulted a human diplomatic officer. Under the laws of the Galactic Council, any being has the right to defend themselves against unprovoked violence." "Defend himself?" Korath's voice rose even higher. "He cut off his head. That is not defense. That is murder." Kate did not back down. When a Selvari strikes a human with full force, using clawed hands, it can be considered a lethal attack. Your species is larger, stronger, and armed with natural weapons. Officer Morrison had every reason to believe his life was in danger. Korath started to respond, but High Counselor Timora raised one of her hands for silence. "Enough," she said firmly. "We will examine this matter properly. Bring the recordings." A technician hurried forward and activated a large display screen. The recording from just minutes ago began to play, showing the entire confrontation from start to finish. Everyone in the hall watched in silence as Vorath approached Jack, insulted him, insulted the ambassador, and then struck him across the face. Then they watched Jack kill him. When the recording ended, Timora turned to Kate. "Ambassador Sullivan, your officer's actions were extreme. However, I can see that Commander Vorath initiated the physical confrontation." Kate nodded. "I would also like to submit additional evidence, High Counselor." She touched her datapad and sent files to the main display. "These are the service records of Officer Jack Morrison. He is not simply a security guard. He is a decorated veteran of the HFY War, awarded the Silver Star for valor in combat, and the Distinguished Service Medal for actions above and beyond the call of duty." The display showed images and reports from the war. Jack leading a squad behind enemy lines. Jack carrying wounded soldiers to safety. Jack standing alone against a HFY assault wave, holding a position until reinforcements arrived. "Officer Morrison has served humanity with honor for 15 years, Kate continued. He has killed in battle when necessary, but he has never started a fight. Every death at his hands has been in defense of human lives. Korath slammed his fist on the table. I do not care about his history. He killed Commander Vorath, and he must pay. Before anyone else could speak, the doors of the hall opened again. A new Selvari walked in, older than the others, with faded scales and cold, calculating eyes. His uniform was covered with more medals than Vorath had worn, and every Selvari in the room immediately bowed their heads in respect. Admiral Zethix had arrived. He walked slowly across the hall, his gaze moving from the covered body of Vorath to the blood on the floor to the human, still standing quietly in the middle of it all. When he reached the council table, he turned to face Korath. "Be silent," he said quietly. His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. Korath's mouth snapped shut. Zethix turned to High Counselor Timora. "I have seen the recording. I have reviewed the situation." He paused and took a slow breath. "On behalf of the Selvari Empire, I offer an official apology for the actions of Commander Vorath." The shock in the room was almost physical. Korath looked like he was about to faint. "Admiral," Korath whispered, "you cannot mean that." Our honor demands that we do not start wars we cannot win," Zethix interrupted. He finally looked at Jack, and there was something in his eyes that might have been fear, or might have been respect. "I have studied humans. I know what they are capable of. Commander Vorath was a fool who let his pride destroy him." He turned back to Timora. "The Selvari Empire does not wish to go to war over the actions of a single arrogant officer." Timora nodded slowly. "The Council acknowledges your apology, Admiral. We will consider this matter resolved, pending any additional claims from either party." Kate stepped forward. "Humanity accepts the apology. We have no desire for further conflict. Officer Morrison acted in self-defense, and we consider the matter closed." As the formal statements were recorded and the delegates began to recover from their shock, a quiet conversation was happening in the corner of the hall. A Torvani ambassador, old and wise, was speaking to his young aide. "Do you understand now?" The ambassador asked softly. "Do you see why we never touched them?" The young aide was still staring at Jack with wide eyes. "I thought the stories were exaggerated." The ambassador shook his head. "The stories are not exaggerated. If anything, they do not tell the whole truth. Humans are the most patient species in the galaxy. They will endure insults, mockery, even threats. They will smile and negotiate and offer peace." He paused. "But if you touch them, if you raise a hand against them, they will kill you before you even realize you have made a mistake." The young aide swallowed hard. "What should we do?" The ambassador watched as Jack was finally escorted out of the hall by Kate and the human security team. The human walked with his head held high, showing no shame, no regret. "We do what every wise species has learned to do," the ambassador said. "We treat them with respect, and we keep our hands to ourselves." The video spread faster than any recording in galactic history. Within 1 hour, it had been viewed on every inhabited world in Council space. Within 1 day, it had reached the outer territories, the independent stations, even the remote colonies on the edge of known space. Everyone wanted to see the moment when a human Deathworlder showed the galaxy exactly what he was. On Earth, the news channels played the recording on an endless loop. Military analysts broke down each second of the fight, explaining to civilian audiences just how skilled Jack Morrison truly was. Former soldiers called in to share their own stories, talking about training exercises where humans practiced killing enemies in close combat. Parents watched with their children and quietly reminded them that this was why humanity had survived for so long. In the capital city of Geneva, General Amanda Cole stood behind a podium facing dozens of reporters. She was the commander of all human military forces in the diplomatic corps. and she had been chosen to speak because she was known for her calm and steady presence. Officer Jack Morrison acted in accordance with his training and with human military law. She said clearly, "When physically assaulted, any human service member has the right and the duty to neutralize the threat." Commander Vorath chose to strike a human. He faced the consequences of that choice. A reporter from a major network raised his hand. "General, some alien governments are calling this an overreaction. They say killing someone over a slap is barbaric." General Cole's expression did not change. "A slap from a Selvari is not the same as a slap from a human." Commander Vorath outweighed Officer Morrison by 60 kilograms. His natural claws left wounds that required medical treatment. In human military terms, this was an armed assault by a larger opponent. She paused. Officer Morrison responded appropriately. "We stand behind his actions completely." Far from Earth, in the palace of the Selvari homeworld, a very different conversation was taking place. Vorath's family had demanded an audience with the Emperor himself, and they had brought a recording of the incident to show him. Emperor Sethrek watched the video in silence. When it ended, he sat still for a long moment. "My nephew was always too proud," he finally said. "I warned him many times that his arrogance would destroy him." Vorath's mother stepped forward, her scales flushed with grief and anger. "My son was murdered by a human animal. Surely we cannot let this insult stand. Surely we must have revenge." The Emperor shook his head slowly. "And what would revenge cost us? The humans control 40 star systems. Their fleet is smaller than ours, but their soldiers are the deadliest in the galaxy." He gestured at the screen where the video had played. "You saw how quickly that human killed 3 Selvari warriors. 3 against 1, and he did not even breathe hard. Then we attack in greater numbers," the mother insisted. "We send 100 soldiers, 1,000, and they will send their own thousands," the Emperor replied. "Have you read the reports from the HFY War? Do you know what humans did to an enemy that outnumbered them 10 to 1? He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The HFY had the largest army in the galaxy. The humans broke them in 3 years. They burned hive cities that had stood for 10,000 years. They fought with a fury that the HFY could not match, could not understand. He turned back to face his sister-in-law. Vorath struck a human and died for it. If we strike humanity, we will all die. I will not sacrifice our empire for one fool's wounded pride." The family left the palace in bitter silence, but the Emperor's decision held. There would be no war. On a small transport ship traveling through neutral space, a group of young aliens gathered around a screen to watch the video for the 20th time. They came from different species, different worlds, different backgrounds. But they all shared the same expression of fearful fascination. "Look at his face," one of them whispered. "He does not even look angry. He just does it." Another shook her head. "I always thought humans were weak. They are so small, so soft-looking." "That is what Vorath thought," a third one said quietly. "And now Vorath is dead." The oldest in the group, a scarred veteran who had served on a mixed-species security team, leaned back in his seat. "I worked with humans for 3 years," he said. "They are the best friends you can have. They will share their food, protect your back, even die for you if needed." He paused. "But I learned very quickly to never, ever make them angry." Back on Nexus Prime, Jack Morrison was preparing to leave. His orders had come through from Earth. He was being recalled home not for punishment but for reassignment. The diplomatic corps had decided that his presence at the station might cause too much tension with the remaining Selvari delegates. Kate Sullivan came to see him off at the docking bay. She looked tired but relieved. The crisis was over, and war had been avoided. It was the best possible outcome. "I am sorry you have to leave," she said. You did nothing wrong. Jack shook his head. I killed a man in front of the entire galaxy. Even if it was justified, there are consequences. He picked up his bag and slung it over his shoulder. Besides, I think I have done enough diplomacy for one lifetime. Kate almost smiled. What will you do back on Earth? They want me to train new security officers. Teach them what I know. He paused at the door of the shuttle. Maybe I can teach them how to avoid situations like this. How to stay calm, stay patient, until patience is no longer an option. Kate nodded. Take care of yourself, Jack. He looked at her one last time, then stepped into the shuttle. As the doors closed behind him, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about Vorath's arrogant smile, about the sound the blade had made, about the weight of the head as it hit the floor. He did not regret what he had done. He would do it again if he had to. But that did not mean he enjoyed it. The shuttle lifted off and carried him toward the stars, toward home. And behind him, the galaxy continued to watch his video and learn the lesson that Vorath had died to teach. Never touch a Deathworlder. 1 year had passed since the incident that changed the galaxy forever. Nexus Prime looked the same as it always had. A massive station floating in the void, a meeting place for 1,000 species. But everything had changed. The way aliens walked through the halls, the way they spoke to each other, the way they looked at humans. Kate Sullivan returned to the station as the lead human ambassador for the new summit. This time, there was no tension in the air, no whispered threats, no arrogant commanders looking for trouble. When she walked through the diplomatic hall, representatives from 12 species stepped aside to let her pass. Some even bowed their heads slightly in greeting. Respect. That was what she saw in their eyes now. Not friendship, not love, but respect. The kind of respect that came from understanding exactly what you were dealing with. Danny Holt walked beside her as her new security chief. He was younger than Jack Morrison had been, with short brown hair and a friendly face that made him look less threatening than he really was. He had served in the same unit as Jack years ago, and he had been personally chosen for this assignment. It feels different here, Danny said quietly as they entered the main hall. Kate nodded. It is different. The incident with Vorath changed everything. The galaxy finally understood that the stories about humans were not exaggerated. The summit began with opening statements from High Counselor Timora. She spoke about cooperation, about peace, about the need for all species to work together. Her words were carefully chosen, and she made no reference to what had happened in this same hall 1 year ago. But everyone was thinking about it. During the first break, Danny stepped away from the human delegation to get a drink from one of the refreshment stations. A young Salvari officer was standing nearby, looking at him with obvious curiosity. You are human, the officer said. It was not a question. Danny nodded. I am. The officer hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. I have studied your species. We all have, since the incident. I know that you come from a world where the gravity is heavy, where the air is filled with poison, where predators hunt everything that moves. He paused. Is it true? Is your planet really that dangerous? Danny thought about how to answer. He could have bragged, could have tried to make Earth sound even more terrifying than it was. But that was not his way. Earth is dangerous, he said simply. Everything on our planet is trying to kill everything else. The animals, the plants, even the weather. Humans evolved to survive all of it. He took a sip of his drink. But that does not make us monsters. It just makes us hard to kill. The young officer considered this. I watched the recording. The one where your officer killed Commander Vorath. He looked down at his own clawed hands. I always thought Salvari were strong, but he moved so fast. It was like Vorath was standing still. Jack Morrison is one of the best soldiers humanity has ever produced, Danny said. But any human could have done the same thing. Maybe not as cleanly, maybe not as quickly. But when you push a human too far, we all fight back. It is in our blood. The officer nodded slowly. I understand now why my superiors tell us never to touch humans. Never to threaten them. Never to even raise our voices around them. Danny smiled slightly. That is probably good advice. But you know, most humans are pretty friendly. We do not want to fight. We spent thousands of years learning how not to fight because fighting each other almost destroyed us. He set down his empty glass. All we ask is that others treat us with the same respect we show them. Do that, and we will be the best friends you ever had. The officer seemed to relax slightly. That does not sound so difficult. It is not, Danny agreed. Just remember one thing. What is that? Danny's smile faded, and for just a moment, the friendly look in his eyes was replaced by something harder, something ancient. Do not hit us. The summit continued for 3 more days. Negotiations that had been stalled for years suddenly moved forward. Disputes that seemed impossible to resolve found solutions. It was as if the entire galaxy had decided that cooperation was better than conflict, at least when humans were involved. On the final day, Kate Sullivan delivered a speech to the full assembly. She stood at the podium where so many historic words had been spoken, and she looked out at the representatives of 1,000 different worlds. Humanity does not seek war, she said. We never have. Our history is filled with violence, yes, but it is also filled with art, with music, with love. We have spent centuries learning to control our darker impulses, to channel our aggression into productive things. She paused. But we will never pretend to be something we are not. We are Deathworlders. We come from a planet that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived. We thrived. And if anyone threatens us, we will do whatever is necessary to protect ourselves and our people. She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of delegates from species that had once thought humans were weak, primitive, unimportant. All we ask is respect, she continued. Treat us as equals, and you will find no better allies. But never, ever mistake our patience for weakness. Because when our patience runs out, the galaxy has seen what happens next. When she finished, there was no applause. There did not need to be. Our message had been received. After the summit ended, High Counselor Timora officially ratified new protocols for all diplomatic interactions involving humans. The protocol stated that humans had an automatic right to self-defense in any situation, and that any physical contact with a human without their consent would be considered an act of aggression. No one objected. Years later, in military academies across the galaxy, instructors showed the recording of Vareth's death to new recruits. They made them watch it again and again, until every student could see exactly what had happened in those 5 seconds. This is lesson 1, the instructors would say. This is what happens when you underestimate a human. This is what happens when you let your pride overwhelm your judgment. This is what happens when you touch a Deathworlder. The students would watch in silence, and they would learn. On Earth, Jack Morrison continued to train new officers. He taught them how to stay calm under pressure, how to read body language, how to diffuse dangerous situations before they exploded into violence. But he also taught them what to do when violence became unavoidable. You are representatives of humanity, he would tell each new class. The galaxy is watching you. They are waiting to see if the stories about us are true. He would pause and look at their young, eager faces. Show them that we are patient. Show them that we are kind. Show them that we want peace. Then his eyes would grow cold, and his voice would drop. And if they still do not understand, show them what happens when they push us too far. In the decades that followed, no alien ever physically struck a human again. The lesson had been learned.